Title: Ed Games Expo, Special Education Showcase. Terry Jackson is a black man with a shaved head and black glasses. He's in his home office with a glass bookcase behind him.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us for the Special Education Showcase at the Ed Games Expo. I'm Terry Jackson, the lead for the Office of Special Education Programs Technology Program. You're in for a unique and exciting event today. We'll be meeting students, tech users, and developers who will be talking about innovations in accessible technology and the impact it has on their lives. But before I bring on these engaging participants, I'd like to briefly introduce our special guest, Matthew Whitaker. Matthew is a jazz pianist as well as an organist, drummer, composer, and arranger. His third album, Connections, comes out in August of this year. He's a lifelong user of assistive technology and accessible materials. Matthew, welcome to the showcase.
Thank you so much. It is a pleasure to be a part of this event.
We're truly honored that you're here. At the end of the showcase, we'll have the opportunity to talk a little bit more about the importance of accessible technology in your own life and career. And I know you have a special presentation for us later. But right now, I'm very eager to begin this event, and I'm confident that everyone attending will be inspired to learn more about accessible designs and perhaps create their own game-changing uses of technology. Now, I'm going to turn things over to Amanda Bastoni of the National Accessible Educational Materials Center at CAST. Amanda?
Amanda Bastoni is a white woman sitting in her home office next to a bookcase. She's wearing a black t-shirt that shows the face of a tiger.
Thank you so much, Terry. I can't wait to hear more from Matthew later in the show. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Amanda Bastoni, and I'm in my home office in Peterborough, New Hampshire. And I'm wearing this dark gray shirt with a tiger on the front, and it says, "Never silence your roar." During these next few segments, you're going to hear directly from students and educators and scientists about the game-changing power of technology. And I challenge you to ask yourself, how does accessible technology ensure that everyone's voice is heard? How does technology allow all of us to roar? Oh, and as you watch these, please take time to add your comments and questions into the chat. That way we can ask them directly to our participants in our final segment.
Text appears: game-changing technology. CAST, until learning has no limits.
Technology, for me, is probably my best friend.
I would describe technology as my right-hand man.
The woman speaking uses a laptop and is seen graduating from college.
Without technology, my life would look very different, that's for sure.
I've been able to accomplish so much that I couldn't before.
New York City student Ilyana Mejia.
Technology has really come a long way, and it's helped me so much in school, in my social life, and everything in between, traveling. So it's been life-changing.
The iPad really, for myself and for my students that are low vision, has really been revolutionary for us.
West Virginia School for the Blind, teacher of the visually impaired, John Strickland.
To enlarge text, you're able to invert the text where you have a light-colored text on a dark background.
John scans through enlarged text on a tablet.
Take pictures and videos of objects. It might be an object on a board or an object on my student's desk that I'm unable to see, so I'll use my camera.
Brighton, Minnesota student Ella Johnson.
I could not be in any of the classes I am if I didn't have the technology that I use ready and available for me.
Peterborough, New Hampshire student Trace Borozinski.
With ADHD, it's really hard for me to sit down and just type.
Trace types at his computer using speech to text.
And I've been using voice to type to get rid of some of that barrier.
Eastern Nazarene College graduate Jessica Fiascanaro.
Amazon Alexa or Google Home have opened such a wide range of doors for me because literally all I have to say is, "Hey Google, turn on the light," and it's done. And I don't have to worry about, oh, did the last person that I was with leave this remote in a location that I can reach it?
I think the main accessibility feature that I use is voiceover.
Ilyana adjusts the speaking rate.
It takes the visual information that's on the screen and it translates that into speech so that even if you don't have vision, you can still know what's happening.
Ella's mom, Beth Johnson.
I think Ella using Bookshare as much as she does, where she is listening to the text and seeing it highlighted in front of her.
The program highlights line after line of text on a smartphone.
Has definitely changed the way she reads out loud. Her reading scores have gone up every year, and the only thing we've done is use Bookshare every year.
West Virginia School for the Blind student, Madison Sharpless.
I've just loved video games ever since I was little, and no matter how hard my vision will get, like really bad or anything, I will always keep playing because I really enjoy the stories. I love running around in the world, seeing what I could find. It has been the one thing that has kept me afloat, we'll say.
Whenever I find a game that is accessible for me, I feel relieved.
New York City student, Liam Cruz.
I can actually include my friends in something and not feel left out, and I can actually have fun.
He enlarges an image.
I think, especially with the amount of disabilities there are, just the slightest bit of accessibility goes a long way.
I think it's important to put yourself in our shoes to consider, what if the text is too small? What if there are no auditory cues? What if this could be something that causes eye fatigue?
I would simply start by having a conversation with people that have disabilities and say, what would be helpful for you? What are some struggles that you would have with using it, and what could we do to make it easier?
A student uses a refreshable Braille display.
The technology that we have available for our students can make the difference and can help them to be independent, self-sufficient, confident adults. Every single day and every single class period, we utilize technology to make it as accessible as possible. I mean, we can't go without it.
Young people use accessible features on smartphones, tablets, and laptops. Logos appear, CAST and National Center on Accessible Educational Materials. More logos, ideas that work, U.S. Office of Special Education Programs, Galdos Pictures, and Bridge Multimedia, empowering accessibility.
We met with the students and educators in that last segment individually. But the messages they were sharing were so similar and moving and powerful that our team couldn't help but wonder, what would happen if we got all of those students together in the same room, at least virtually? And so we did. And the result was a 2-hour-long conversation covering topics ranging from accessibility struggles on standardized tests to how fast each of them was using their screen reader. One of the most inspiring moments in that interview for me was when Fletcher Mag shared how filming this project opened his eyes to how critical accessibility is. As you watch this segment, I know you're going to agree with me. These students are themselves game changers.
Text, student panel. The participants. Text, Ella lives in Minnesota, has dyslexia and dysgraphia, uses technology in every class to help her learn. Ella is a teenage girl with brown hair pulled tightly back, wearing a college sweatshirt.
I wish everyone knew that accessibility isn't a choice, and if I don't have all my materials in an accessible format, then I just cannot do the work or activity that I'm trying to.
Text, Fletcher lives in New Hampshire, has ADHD, heard about this project through his videography teacher, and used Instagram to find participants. Fletcher is a teenage boy with a red and yellow cap over his curly hair. He's wearing a bright tropical shirt.
Throughout the process, I've learned a lot about accessibility and speech-to-text technology, and I've also improved my filmmaking and journalism game.
Text, Madison lives in West Virginia, has hydrocephalus and a visual impairment, uses a magnifier on the computer to read, and loves to play video games. Madison is a young woman with straight, long, dark blonde hair.
One day my teacher he suddenly emailed me and was like, "Hey Madison, I have a great opportunity for you, and it deals with making technology and gaming more accessible. And I, of course, immediately agreed anyway, because I love gaming and I would love to see video games and everything become more accessible, especially like the harder, like graphic difficulty ones. And I just thought I might help people with it, because there are so many gamers that can't play games because of their visual impairments, and I want to be able to help.
Text. Ilyana lives in New York City, has Leber congenital amaurosis and is legally blind. Uses voiceover at its fastest setting. Ilyana is a young Hispanic woman wearing a dark head covering.
I thought that would be very exciting to work alongside someone who I knew to make sure our voices as the visually impaired community could be heard. I'm always advocating for this community, and what better way to do this than by participating in a project that is geared towards advocating and speaking about the struggles and how we can improve these struggles for the visually impaired community.
Text. Liam lives in New York City, has Leber congenital amaurosis and is legally blind. Uses technology such as inverted colors, zoom functions, and voiceover, but not as fast as Ilyana. Liam is a teenage boy with dark curly hair and black glasses. He sits in a large office chair.
I spoke alongside Ilyana about the struggles and just generally about being visually impaired. I thought it was really interesting, and I haven't heard of people wanting to make gaming more accessible for people with disabilities, people who are visually impaired. So I wanted to be a part of it because I thought this project was something very unique.
Text. What do you wish people knew about accessibility?
One of the things that I wish people knew about accessibility was that it isn't easy to learn how to use, coming from the person who actually needs the accessibility. They also think that some of these things, you just turn it on and you can use it. But come to realize that using stuff like screen readers, we don't just wake up learning how to use those things. It took Ilyana years to learn how to use her voiceover at 100%. Even though she was born legally blind. And I think it's important that people have patience, and when they have patience and understand that it's a learning process, they can better accommodate those who need accessibilities. And I also like to agree with my peers. I think a lot of their points are very important. Accessibility is definitely not a choice. Like Ella said, without accessibility, the people who need accessibility options wouldn't be able to do very simple things like read a textbook or even find a street sign. So I think it's important that people understand that it's not a choice, it's a necessity.
So I wish people knew that just how important it is for things to be accessible, to have a more deeper understanding of it. I also think it's important that they should take more input about accessibility from people who need the accessibility. It affects everyone very differently, so what they think might work for a certain group of people might not work for every group of people in this community. Everyone is different, and they should take some more input from the people who they are trying to help.
I wanted to be a part of this project because I think it isn't very noticed, and I realized that a lot when I talk to people about that I'm doing it. They really, when I tell them about just speech-to-text technology, not all people know what that is. As a filmmaker, sort of something different that I've never done before, and something more important in the role of society than I've ever done before.
Gaming is a social thing, and I feel like if a lot of people can be involved in gaming, you can bring a lot of people together and just get more people to be exposed to your stuff.
It would be very useful to have people on the team that are visually impaired or need accessibility, because then it can help on not just the spectrum of what they assume, because maybe they might be like, they need larger text. Well, how large of a text maybe someone might need a huge text and they don't make it that accessible for that. Or they might not put as much effort into the app to make it, they might make it accessible, but it might be a little bit wonky because they didn't really think it through hard enough. So it would be way more convenient to have someone who has a visual impairment or has like a situation where they need accessibility. On video game though, I always find a way around everything. I will play it regardless. Even if I run into a tree, I will still play it. But I still have a lot of trouble with the graphic. Games like Ark and all those, too small of a text and you can't make it any bigger. And I have to strain my eyes just to read it. So it's too difficult to do that. Because it would be so much easier if like they could make everything a little slightly bigger. It's just really frustrating to have those situations and not be able to play a game because you might be really interested in it. Like Doom. I want to play Doom so badly, but I can't play it because it's too pretty and too fast-paced. And I wish I could play it, but I wouldn't be able to because I probably wouldn't even be able to finish it because it would be too difficult. I love whenever I find a game that is accessible because then I can be like, oh, they got like color blindness settings and everything. In one game, they actually have voice acting most of the whole game, so I don't strain my eyes. And it also has a different color background kind of situation for the text, so I can see it better.
Text. Why is accessibility important to you?
All throughout both middle and high school so far, every semester I've had to go to all my new teachers and make it very clear to them that I need everything to be in an accessible format from like day one. You can't like just not have it there for me already because, you know, I don't want to get behind and I want to be able to be like everyone else in the class and do all the activities and everything. And yeah, I've had to do a lot of teaching my teachers how they can like give me accessible materials. When it comes to accessibility, especially in like video games or any kind of like leisure activity, it's to me almost more important, you know, because that's where someone doesn't want to like be thinking about like, I don't know, any problems outside of that like world that you're creating.
For me in particular, that makes games more accessible will be like graphics can be like, for me in particular, if it's too realistic, it can be really difficult and I might run into a tree or something in the game. Or it might just be so difficult to navigate and you don't know where you're going. But if it's just normal drawing, maybe make the colors less dramatic and more smooth.
It's very discouraging when I find like a game or an app that I can use to read my books on and it's not as accessible as I'd wish it to be. Or sometimes I'll get apps that are based on like a website and then those apps are not always accessible, but I think it's worse when I've found an app that was accessible and then it stopped being accessible for whatever reason. I think that's very discouraging because, you know, it was a great thing. It was a tool that I used, and then I have to figure out a whole new way of doing whatever that task was. And I had to figure out a whole new way of doing things. Very discouraging to either not find them at all or find them and then they become unusable.
Text. How has your life been impacted by not having accessible technology?
Last year I took the macroeconomics AP test, and it was just a whole ordeal, and it would have been easily avoided if I just had like accessibility on that test. And luckily I got a pretty good score still. It was just really stressful taking the test like that.
Yeah, I just find it very ironic because I'm currently having some problems with the College Board because of my AP exam and the accessibility of that now that everything is online. And just that a lot of the people running those exams tend to not understand just the difficulty and what it means to actually use accessibility.
And I hear Ella mention like AP US History, which is a class that ironically I'm also taking right now. It's hard to get through that class myself. It's crazy how much reading and writing there is. But I don't think it should be frowned upon for if you need to have access to accessibility, that you shouldn't be able to take those classes.
So I actually just recently took the SATs last week, and we've been talking a lot about just technology on phones and iPads and electronic, but we also forget about the technology that is put on our papers, like the Braille or the tactile graphics, because those are very hard to, like, the Braille is easy enough if you've learned it, until they changed the Braille code, which was very frustrating. But even just the tactile graphics on charts and graphs for linear equations or a diagram, when I took the living environment regions, I got really confused on a question because the diagram looked so odd to me. I didn't really understand what it was supposed to mean, and I had to get a description from the proctor. But we shouldn't need to rely on other people's descriptions for things. They should have a better detailed description of the graph, or find a way to make those tactile graphics look better, because they're very important. That could be a make or break test grade for someone, and it's not accessible.
So now basically I have to take my exam tomorrow without a screen reader because I have no idea how to use those screen readers that they're providing. And they don't really understand, or honestly, in my personal opinion, I don't think they really care that much, because it's not easy to just turn on a screen reader you've never used before and then take a 3.5-hour exam. That's just not easy to expect a kid to do that, and to tell them that they have to do that a week before the exam. They also expected my family to get our own reader for the exam, which during COVID, first of all, I don't know why they would do that. But also, they don't take into consideration the family situation. My mom is also visually impaired, so there's no way she can read to me my exam when she also cannot see well. And there are countless other people and families with children who have disabilities who maybe don't speak English, who also have disabilities. There may not even be anyone in the house to be able to read to the child. So I think they don't take any of that into consideration.
Whenever I was taking the test, it was just so difficult. I couldn't even, I would scroll down, go up. It was okay. I could still do it. But they only gave me, I think it was an hour for one test in particular, just to finish it. And I'm like, I did not have enough time at all. And they're like, well, we can't give you any more time. So I didn't even get the score I needed for my college that I wanted to go to. And I was only 1 point away. And I was really upset because I could have gotten that point, but the timing didn't allow it.
But for the SATs, they would only allow you to use Braille writers. So the difference, for those who don't know, between a Braille note and a Braille writer is a Braille note is more it's more internet based sometimes. So it's a slimmer kind of design, and it has a lot more features. It's a smaller device than a Braille writer. It does not require paper. Everything's just kind of a Braille display. A Braille writer is a very big, chunky device. It's like one of those old-fashioned typewriters, but probably a bit smaller. And instead of typing with ink, it just types out dots. Imagine you have to just have this giant machine that only takes in a paper that does about 25 lines, give or take a few lines. So for me to be able to write and take notes down would require a lot of paper switching and also a lot of lines, which I don't have, and that requires a lot of time to make sure I have the paper, make sure that it's not getting jammed in the Braille writer, make sure that I'm typing without any errors so that I don't make a mistake. That would just cause a lot of just stress.
Or I think every person I interviewed said, without me even bringing it up, that they wished the SAT had more accessibility. One of the people that I interviewed, reading every day for her AP Literature class and wanted to switch to a more speech-to-text style thing. And she had experience using apps like Audible, which I found a lot of people find super helpful to them. And if they were just able to download that, or even permitted to download that to use it for their class, it would have made it way easier. But they weren't.
Do you text? Of course you do. Did you know that short message services, or SMS, was invented in 1992 as a way for deaf and hard of hearing people to communicate? Now, 29 years later, everyone uses this technology daily. Texting is just one example of the powerful impact of designing accessible technology. So what's next? Where are we going? What are the emerging trends? This next segment is a collection of what we found out when we started asking educators, professors, researchers, and scientists those questions.
Text, where are we going next with accessible technology? A logo, cast, until learning has no limits.
I think there are three emerging trends that have tremendous potential for the future of educational technology and educational software.
Pennsylvania State University Professor of Education Simon Hooper.
The first is that of artificial intelligence or machine learning. The second is what we commonly call learning analytics.
A wheelchair user wears an AI headset.
And the third is that of immersive technologies.
A woman signs.
My research is related to real-time captioning and real-time interpreting.
RIT National Technical Institute for the Deaf Associate Research Professor Wendy Dannels.
Those are both augmented reality. So if you imagine yourself wearing smart glasses and looking around, imagine being able to see a pop-up with an interpreter or see a pop-up with captions.
Text scrolls across the lens on glasses, translating as an ASL user signs. Wendy fits a screen over a user's eyes.
The data transmission happens nearly simultaneously. And not only that, but it means that a person wearing the smart glasses can walk anywhere, look up and down. They can focus closely on a specific thing, and at the same time they can still receive information.
CAST, National AEM Center Technical Assistance Specialist Luis Perez.
For me, artificial intelligence really has the potential to improve accessibility in a variety of ways. We're already using it. It's available in a number of applications where it can give you a head start on image descriptions. But there's a lot of potential for the future for people to be able to use it in real time to navigate their environments. Right now, I'm using it with my VoiceOver screen reader where I can turn on the camera and I can turn on VoiceOver, and VoiceOver can describe what it sees through the camera to me.
A dog laying on a bed with a red blanket.
RIT National Technical Institute for the Deaf Professor of Environmental Science Melissa Skyer.
I'm actually profoundly deaf, so I hear nothing at all. I'm using an amazing app called Live Transcribe. This app is amazing. I use it for everything: dentist appointments, plumber, any situation that before I would have been doing lip reading. This has saved my life. So
it wasn't until I realized how a piece of software is used by someone with a disability.
A woman with blindness navigates her smartphone screen.
That I really appreciated how important it is to focus on accessibility.
Boston University of Massachusetts Universal Instructional Design Specialist Lori Cooney.
When you look at the country, there's at least 14% of the students are on IEPs and have some sort of disability, whether it's a diagnosis of ADHD, whether it's dyslexia, dysgraphia, whether a student has a visual impairment or a hearing impairment.
A student uses a refreshable Braille display.
And even if people are not disabled, everyone has learning preferences. Everybody.
Another student listens to audio on her phone.
I think as we move forward with the use of technology in education, we need to be asking ourselves the question, how can we make technology accessible to everyone and not just a few?
People often develop a concept which is very exciting, but they may forget about accessibility along the way, or they may think that they can add it in later. But in fact, adding in accessibility at the end makes it more difficult and more complicated to do.
A finger presses accessibility on a tablet. West Virginia School for the Blind, teacher of the visually impaired, John Strickland.
Not only saying, okay, we support Braille peripherals, we have a narrator on the software, but really saying, is that intuitive for the blind person's usage? Is it going to be clear to them, how they're navigating through the menu?
And one of the things that we need to do is ensure that we are not just designing for people, but we're designing with people. That we bring people with disabilities into the design process as project managers, as designers, as programmers. And I think it's really important to make sure that we design inclusive technology so that everybody can participate in finding those solutions that will benefit us all as a society.
A kid stares at a screen.
Even though we're in the year 2021, software is still very young. And I think that the idea of accessibility is in its infancy.
So it's difficult to predict what the future may be like. We may have access to everything on smart glasses instead of just having it being held in our hands. And I think technology can benefit all of us in different ways.
Professor Daniels finishes signing while facing us. Logos appear. CAST and National Center on Accessible Educational Materials. More logos. Ideas that work. U.S. Office of Special Education Programs. Galdo's Pictures and Bridge Multimedia. Empowering accessibility.
Just like with the students, we wanted to bring the adult participants together to have a conversation as a group. This next segment you're about to watch is an engaging and dynamic discussion about accessibility and the future of technology. After watching, we will transition and hear directly from our panelists. But before I go, I want to remind each of you to keep sharing your questions and comments in the chat. Ensure your voice is heard. And remember, never silence your roar.
Text, Adult Panel. The participants: Lori Cooney, University of Massachusetts, Boston, Universal Instructional Design Specialist. Lori is an Italian-American woman with curly black shoulder-length hair.
I thought it was really important to be involved because our mission at the Institute for Community Inclusion at UMass Boston is to make sure that everyone is included regardless of their ability or disability. And so for me, when I'm developing technology for students or instructional technology for teachers, it's so important to make sure that we look at it through the lens of universal design for learning, and that we make sure that students and teachers have access regardless of the program.
Text, Simon Hooper, Pennsylvania State University, Professor of Education. Simon is a white man with white hair and black glasses.
I think it's important to be part of the project because the topic is one that has been largely ignored or certainly underserved, especially in the areas of special education. So although technology is able to do wonderfully sophisticated things, it seems that people who have various forms of different abilities are often left out in terms of the designs that are necessary to help people to be able to access those environments.
Text, Wendy Daniels, RIT, National Technical Institute for the Deaf, Associate Research Professor. Wendy is a female with short, dirty blonde hair. An interpreter is voicing for her as she communicates in American Sign Language.
Why am I so interested in this project? because the world is full of wonderfully diverse people. However, not everyone is on equal footing yet. I look forward to continuing my work to reduce disparities and fill the gaps. For example, to ensure that everyone receives the same information, whether it be through ASL, or the same information through captioning, or through other languages or modalities. And what is a bonus of this work is technology, which we can develop with the goal of reducing inequalities and ensuring equal access for everyone.
Text, John Strickland, West Virginia School for the Blind, teacher of the visually impaired. John is a white man with pale blonde hair. He is wearing a black zip-up jacket.
Sure. For me, it was important to be involved in this project because you guys are working with tech producers. You guys are working with big names in technology. And I and my students use technology every single day. We use technology both that is specifically designed for blindness and exceptionalities. And we also use technology that's more universal, like the iPhone or video game platforms or things like that. So for me, it was important because this directly impacts what my students and I do every single day inside and outside of the school. And I just thought it would be a good chance to get our voices heard.
Text, what do you wish people knew about accessibility?
I'd say let's start with the past. When I was young, captions were not available on TV. At that time, I would watch a black and white TV, and my parents refused to buy the new color TV. They waited until Sears became the first store selling a TV with captions. Once we bought that, it was a totally new experience, and I felt that there was a sense of belonging there, which was amazing. So it's so important to feel that sense of belonging and remain connected. It's neat that so many things improved afterwards. So when I think of the word accessibility, I think about how to enhance relationships between different diverse people and ensure that they continue to be involved.
So for us, isolation is a big issue. And one of the things that we said, kind of tongue-in-cheek, is that COVID is one of the worst things that could have happened, but there's a silver lining. You know, one of the best things that could have happened is that it's increased use of technology. We've had to. So using things like Zoom or Microsoft Teams or different things, my students and I were able to get in touch to do assignments. We were also able to communicate and to have social time and to just really keep in touch and you know, expand our world a little bit. One thing that we also discussed, Amanda, was how some of my students who have residual vision will play video games, and even my students with blindness will play video games like text adventure games, games that are designed for the blind, or some games that just have different salient features, and how video games, especially for our secondary students, really serve as a social mechanism, because when you have something like a social event or a sleepover or something, there always seems to be two things, pizza and video games around which people socialize. Yeah, technology is a big factor in how we socialize and how we connect to one another, I think.
It's really fairness. You know, it's not leaving that one student behind who might have a cognitive disability or hearing impairment or visual impairment. It's making sure that every single student or every single individual is having the same access for each other so that they can all dream big, that they can all have the same experiences regardless of that ability or disability that they have. Well, in my life, I work with, students and teachers. And so accessibility to me is to make sure that when I'm teaching students that I include them using accessible technology so that all students can access materials, whether they have a print disability or they have a hearing impairment or autism, whatever they might have as a student with a disability. But also teachers on a higher level, I do a lot of training on universal design for learning and making sure that they understand that if you include these accessible features with alt text and, teach to text to speech and speech to text and turning on closed captioning and using those kinds of resources, that they're not only meeting the needs of that one student that might need an accommodation, but they are meeting the needs of everyone, regardless of their disclosing whether they have a need for an accommodation.
Text, why is accessible technology important to you?
For me, as somebody who's relatively young, it's been important for going to school, being able to go through college, being able to go through graduate school, being able to do that when, traditional, 12-point font or less books, or even 24-point or less, are too small for you to be able to read. Having access to large print, having access to inverted text, to Braille, and to other accommodations make it to where you're able to access media that you just simply wouldn't have been able to access, or in the past, somebody might have had to have read to one that they would have had to have received human read aloud for. So I think having access to those materials have been helpful. And then also just being independent, moving 4 hours away from my family for a job, using things like Google Maps with accessibility features to be able to navigate independently, or being able to look up bus schedules and being able to travel independently. I rely so much on if not my cane, my cell phone while I'm traveling. So yeah, for a number of aspects of being independent, it's been very helpful. It wouldn't be the same without it.
Everyone wants to participate in society in general. Maybe as part of their job or their career, or maybe the person wants to be promoted in their future. How are you able to enable them to move up in their journey? For example, maybe a supervisor decides to send someone to a professional development conference. Prior to attending the conference, deaf and hard of hearing people historically have to request for interpreters or real-time captioning in advance. And then they have to select which workshops they're going to, make a list, communicate with the captionist and the interpreter, and make sure that the presenter's PowerPoint slides are sent in advance. There's a lot of preparation to do, and then they still have to fly to the conference, get there, and follow the exact schedule because they have pre-coordinated services. There's a lot of procedures that deaf and hard of hearing people have to do on their own, so many people don't realize the work that goes into this. So the use of technology such as smart glasses, being able to see the real-time interpreter just in the corner of your eye while the interpreter works from home, or the same concept applies for a real-time captionist, means that you're able to plan on going to this professional development seminar and you're just able to have this more seamless, fluid experience. There's less things that come up unexpectedly. So that's another example of how important it is to have accessibility in everyone's lives.
And one of the things that I'm very aware of is that although it's not typically thought of an accessibility support tool, I now have to wear glasses pretty much all my waking hours. And without these glasses, I would find it very difficult to navigate my environment. I wouldn't be able to read. I wouldn't be able to drive. In general, I wouldn't be able to see very well, which would have a profound impact on my life. And I realize that glasses are just a very basic technology. And today, with digital technologies, we're able to create all sorts of environments that support people and their ability to navigate the world. And one of the things that really excites me is that we're really still in the infancy of accessibility. It's only been going for a few years. And what is very exciting is to say, well, what's going to happen in 10 years or 20 years or 30 years?
The first thing that students, when they met me, mentioned was, you have to look closely at the screen just like I do, or you use a cane just like I do, or you use similar software. You hold the iPad from a similar angle as the way I do. So I think just seeing that you have things in common and seeing you as a role model. I live in a very small town here where my residential school is set. I have my own apartment. I do my own daily living tasks, like, going to the bank, getting groceries, etc. And students see that and they comment upon it. I mean, sometimes students even come by where I live when they're doing their orientation mobility training, and they say, I hope that I'm like that one day, or I hope that I'm able to do what you're doing. And I mean, I don't think there's anything special about me, but I do hope that I can show students, you can do it. We can give you the tools. We can equip you with the training, with the Braille materials, with the technology, with the traveling skills, because for our population, it is real. As most estimates show that there's about 70% of blind and visually impaired people who are unemployed. And I want to show my students it doesn't have to be the case. And there are opportunities out there, but you have to learn to use the tools that you have.
Text What advice do you have for game designers and edtech developers?
I think continuing to make accessibility something that's built in and something that is out of the box. One of the things I still find to be challenging for myself and for other students is oftentimes, for instance, when you get a new device, you go through a couple introductory pages, you have to set up the device. So, and usually it's not until at the very end of the setup process that you are able to start putting in your, modifications. You get your device set up, you get to the home screen, and then you can go to settings, and then you can get the accessibility. But before that, you're even trying to get the language set up. You're trying to get the Wi-Fi network hooked in. But just trying to make sure that, the whole user experience is seamless, because when I have to take my phone or my device and put it under a digital magnifier under a third-party device, again, that makes me feel like I am being a little bit left out.
If I were around designers and developers, I would want them to be able to understand, first of all, the needs of people who have different types of abilities. And then secondly, to be able to understand what it is that the technology can do to support those needs. Because there's a tremendous amount that can be done with existing technologies to create more accessible environments.
One of the things that I think about is when one is becoming a teacher of the visually impaired or some sort of other vision specialist, a common practice, a common experience is to go under sleep shade. That is to simulate being blind, or to wear vision simulator goggles. We'll have goggles that are sort of blurred to simulate lowered visual acuity, or they might have splotches on them to emulate a loss of visual field. And doing that even for myself already with significant visual impairment, going under the sleep shade experience, losing my vision totally for 2 hours or more definitely made a big impact on me. Seeing, considering how would I use my phone, how would I go about navigating even around my house, let alone within my community. So definitely, it's good to get the perspectives of the people with exceptionalities themselves, but also to try to see for yourself, how would I navigate my phone without my eyesight, or if I had, no access to auditory cues or other things that so many take for granted.
I think that you could solve some of these accessibility issues by making sure that your program works on all devices, not just app-based for one device, like an iPod. I mean, an iPhone. Look at me, I'm aging myself. Like an iPhone or a Google tablet or something like that. Just make sure that it's universal and you can access it through everything. I also would recommend that you use the most up-to-date programming code so that it can work with screen readers and different technologies that are out there right now and be open for the future. And try them with students who have disabilities. Don't just try it through a web-based, checklist. Actually use people who have different kinds of needs and make sure it works with them. And if it doesn't, redevelop it, redesign it, and make sure when you redesign it that the student or the person who's using the technology has access to it. And then you can think about all of those needs up front, and you won't have to reprogram later, which is costly.
Here at the university, we're fortunate to have a large population of deaf and hard of hearing students, which is really neat. Meaning, their career opportunities are where they will become future contributors. We're really educating them to become future researchers. And when they become researchers, they're considered underrepresented researchers, meaning that we're growing the population of minority researchers, unlike you see in many communities everywhere else. And another thought is that we're training deaf and hard of hearing students to become software developers, to increase the number of people with those technical skills. Then they will go out and train future software developers. It's like sending them out already enculturated within their native language and already knowing what the experience of the design process should be like. And so we're increasing the pipeline of those developers who are underrepresented in the workforce, and they also have expertise on accessibility already. They're able to then broaden the knowledge of their future colleagues. I would like to add one comment regarding the design process. Instead of having multiple iterations and back and forth to correct issues, even better would be to make sure to include feedback directly from the communities in the very beginning before going further in the process. This will reduce the number of unnecessary issues and steps. It's important to start thinking about including those accessibility features right away as the design is started, instead of in later stages.
Text, where are we headed when it comes to accessible technology?
I really feel like, technology's leveled the playing field in a way where it would have been more challenging back even 20 years ago because of, frankly, the communication. Communication is so important in the era in which we live.
I have two specific pieces of advice for people who want to learn more about accessibility. One involves understanding the needs of people with disabilities, and the other involves understanding the potential of technology to be able to create more accessible environments. The first thing that I did that really opened my eyes to the needs of people with disabilities or different types of abilities was to go to a conference that displayed an enormous breadth of hardware technologies that are available for people with disabilities. And it just blew me away. I'd had no idea that these technologies, these hardware technologies, these assistive technologies existed. The second thing that I did was to get involved in a committee on campus. I don't know why I was asked to join the committee, but the committee was all about accessibility for students at Penn State. And one of the really important things that I learned about there were the WCAG guidelines, the WCAG guidelines, which have a wealth of recommendations for designers and developers on how to design and develop accessible environments to make educational materials accessible to all.
Title: A Musical Chat with Matthew Whitaker. Terry Jackson speaks to us again.
Wow, what an incredible day. Thank you to all our panelists for the incredible stories and demonstrations. I think we have a much clearer understanding of accessible technology and its game-changing uses. Now I'm going to invite Matthew Whitaker back to help us close out the showcase. But first, a little background information on this extraordinary young man. When he was just 10 years old, this music prodigy opened for Stevie Wonder at the Apollo Theater, and he was invited to play for Stevie Wonder's induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Matthew entered Juilliard in the fall of 2019 as the first blind undergraduate student to join Juilliard's Jazz Studies program. It's my great pleasure to introduce Matthew Whitaker.
Matthew Whitaker, an African-American male wearing sunglasses and headphones, speaks to us from his home music studio. He is surrounded by many keyboards and percussion instruments.
So Matthew, thank you for being here today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. It's truly my pleasure and honor. Which pieces of assistive technology has been most a part of your life growing up in middle school and high school?
Well, I would say that what I had and what I still use to this day is my computer, and I use various screen readers from JAWS to Narrator, NVDA, and VoiceOver. And I'd say one other piece of technology that I used, especially when I was in high school a lot, was my Braille note as well.
So what's been the most important accessible educational material in your life growing up?
As far as education, I think one of the things that was very important was me getting everything transcribed in Braille. So I had different Braille books, and one subject that was, difficult was math, because everything had to be transcribed, including the graphs, and sometimes my aide would, even like by hand, like just make different objects for me so I can understand whatever the problem is or whatever. And I would say another tool that I used was the Perkins Brailler for brailing everything out.
So they really played a even more critical part of your education for math, which is always a difficult subject for a lot of people.
Exactly.
So considering all the accessible materials that you use, like the Braille note and the voiceover, what advice would you give to students who use assistive technology and accessible educational materials?
I would say don't be afraid to experiment. A lot of this technology, since it's improving a lot, you're able to tailor everything to your needs and just always have fun when using this technology because it's available to all of us. We just have to keep using it and learning about it. Like, don't be afraid to ask for a transcription of stuff in Braille. Don't be afraid to use Braille displays.
You hit the nail on the head. It's always really important to kind of speak up and ask for what you need.
Yeah.
But importantly, having fun in what you're doing. So thinking back, as you were growing up in school, in elementary or middle school, was there something that the teacher provided, a technology that really helped you in school to give you that confidence to do whatever you're doing today?
I would say one piece of technology that really started to love using was the Braille note because I can use it for writing documents or just writing emails or doing whatever, like internet stuff.
So Matthew, what advice do you have for parents and early childhood educators who are reluctant to introduce Braille literacy to their kids?
I wouldn't be where I am today without Braille education. I would say for the parents, don't be afraid to, let your child or your kids get into using Braille and technology. So that way, when they become older, they have a head start and, they know what to do when, different scenarios come. I think both technology and Braille both work together in many ways. For example, when I'm doing music, there is a code for Braille music, and I am able to learn the music that way if I want to. But also, I would say, just always keep working on your Braille skills because there may be times when you are reading something and you have to know like what it says and you have to maybe just read out loud to the rest of the class. But yeah, once you practice with it, it just becomes more easier to understand. And now looking back on it, I realized that, all that hard work was really worth it because I'm able to travel all over the world with my music, and I've been endorsed by different companies, and I'm currently studying at Juilliard as well. So I'm very grateful.
Well, Matthew, thank you again for being part of the Ed Games Expo Special Education Showcase.
Thank you so much.
Your story really amplifies the kind of game-changing nature of accessibility, which is clearly illustrated by everyone featured in the earlier sessions today in the panels, as well as the Q&A. And before we end, I know you're a gifted composer and arranger who's already won the Herb Alpert Young Jazz Composers Award. Can you show us how you build a piece of music using assistive technology?
Yeah, definitely. I made this song a few days ago, actually, and it is specifically for this event. So I do use Logic Pro for recording everything. It is made by Apple, and I used different software sounds that are being played by my MIDI controller. And so I have all the tracks laid out.
Toggle channel strip solo on.
Right.
One bar. Top.
So, and I can just go through each track. So
tracks, contents, tracks in tracks, track one.
Interact with this.
Track 2 track 2 caps lock.
By the way, the reason why VoiceOver is saying all those numbers is because it's just telling me like where I'm at in the project, like what bar am I on, what beat. So
toggle 1 bar 1.
And
track 3 and 3 groove. Track 2 and track 3. Toggle channel strip solo on.
So 1 bar. And all together is the whole thing.
4 beats. Toggle channel strip mute off. Track 3.
Contents of this video were developed under a cooperative agreement with the U.S. Department of Education, number H327Z190004. However, those contents do not necessarily represent the policy of the U.S. Department of Education, and you should not assume endorsement by the federal government. Project Officer Rebecca Sheffield, Ph.D.